Every culture in recorded history has rules about what you can and cannot eat. Some avoid pork, some avoid beef, some avoid shellfish. But there is exactly one food that every single human culture, on every continent across all of recorded history, refused to treat as a staple. Us. Biologically, a human is just a primate. Muscle, fat, protein, the same building blocks as a pig, which we share 98% of our DNA with. Both edible in theory. So, why is one on every menu on Earth and the other the one thing nobody, anywhere, ever decided to farm? Let's start with the biology, because even before you get to disease or culture, there is something structurally strange about the idea of humans eating humans at scale. Think about every large-scale food system humans have ever built. Every single one follows the same basic principle. You eat things that are further down the food chain than you are. Cows eat grass, you eat cows. Chickens eat grain, you eat chickens. The energy flows upward, and each step is efficient enough that the math works. The problem with eating humans is that humans eat the same things you eat. You are not gaining access to a new energy source. You are recycling the same pool of calories that was already circulating. Every agricultural civilization that ever developed did so by finding ways to extract energy from things that could not extract it themselves. From sunlight through plants, from plants through animals. Eating your own species is the nutritional equivalent of a company that sells exclusively to its own employees. The system does not scale because there is no outside input. Try to think of a single civilization in human history that built a stable food system around eating its own species. You cannot, because there is not one. This is one of the reasons that even cultures where cannibalism did occur historically, it was almost never about food. Anthropologists who have studied the documented cases consistently find the same pattern. When cannibalism appeared, it appeared in ritual contexts, in warfare, in extreme famine situations where the alternative was immediate starvation. What it almost never appeared as was a sustainable food system. The energy mathematics of eating your own species simply do not work the way they work for every other food source humans have ever developed. But the energy problem is not even the most important reason. Because even if the math somehow worked, there is something else happening inside human tissue that makes the biology considerably more dangerous than it looks. Humans, like all species, carry a specific set of pathogens, viruses, bacteria, parasites, that are adapted specifically to human biology. These pathogens are often harmless in their natural environment inside a healthy human body, kept in check by the immune system, contained, managed. But they are specifically adapted to human tissue, which means that when human tissue is introduced into another human body through consumption, those pathogens encounter exactly the kind of environment they are designed for. Every defense mechanism is familiar. Every pathway is already mapped. The immune system's usual advantage disappears. It cannot recognize the threat as foreign because nothing is foreign. Everything is home. Sit with what that means for a moment. Every other animal you eat, your immune system can recognize as genuinely different. There are biological signals that say foreign, that trigger appropriate responses. When you eat your own species, those signals are absent or severely diminished. The pathogens that were adapted to live inside a human body find themselves inside another human body, which is exactly where they were built to thrive. The most documented, most scientifically studied example of what this actually looks like in practice comes from a highland community in Papua New Guinea, and it is one of the most important epidemiological case studies of the 20th century. The four people of the Eastern Highlands practiced mortuary cannibalism, consuming the flesh of deceased community members as a ritual of mourning and respect. Among them, a neurological disease called kuru spread for decades, causing progressive loss of coordination, tremors, and eventually death. Researchers investigating the epidemic in the 1950s and 60s, led by Daniel Carlton Gajdusek, who would later receive the Nobel Prize for this work, traced the disease to the practice of consuming human brain tissue. The cause was not a conventional pathogen, not a virus, not a bacterium. It was a prion, a misfolded protein that causes other proteins to misfold in the same way, spreading through neural tissue with no immune response, no treatment, and invariably causing death. The specific horror of kuru is that it revealed something about human-to-human transmission that had not been fully understood before. Prion diseases, the category that includes kuru and its bovine equivalent that caused the mad cow crisis in Europe, spread most efficiently through consumption of neural tissue from the same species. Cows got bovine prion disease partly because they were being fed rendered cow remains as a protein supplement. 4 people got kuru because they consumed human remains. The pattern is not coincidental. Neural tissue from your own species is, by biological logic, the most efficient possible vector for the kinds of diseases that your species is most susceptible to. The Donner Party, snowbound in the Sierra Nevada in the winter of 1846 to 1847, provides a different kind of data point. 87 emigrants became trapped in mountain snow without food. A small number of survivors consumed the flesh of those who had already died of starvation and exposure. Picture what the accounts actually describe, not the sensationalized version, but the documented one. The survivors who consumed human remains did not emerge healthier or stronger than those who refused. The caloric benefit was real in the immediate short term, measurable in days of survival. But medical historians who have studied the documented accounts note something that gets consistently lost in the retelling. The psychological damage, persistent trauma, dissociation, what we would now recognize as acute stress responses, was severe and long-lasting among virtually everyone who participated. Several survivors later described an inability to process what they had done that persisted for the rest of their lives. The body survived. Something else did not recover nearly as easily, and the account suggests that the human nervous system registers consuming a member of its own species as categorically different from consuming any other food, regardless of the circumstances. This leads to the third layer of the answer, and in some ways the most interesting one, because it operates at a level below conscious decision-making. Every documented human society has developed some form of prohibition against consuming members of its own group, even in circumstances where the energy mathematics of pure survival might argue for it. The universality of this pattern is striking in the same way that the universal avoidance of predator meat is striking. It appears independently in cultures with no contact with each other, in every environment where humans have lived. That kind of convergence, when it appears in human behavior, almost always points to something that natural selection has been pushing toward over a very long time. The most compelling explanation in the scientific literature is straightforward. The taboo against consuming humans functions as an epidemiological defense mechanism. Groups that developed it survive better than groups that did not. Over generations, survival became instinct. Instinct became culture. Communities that avoided consuming their dead avoided the prion transmission pathways that Kuru demonstrated so clearly. Communities that treated their dead as a food resource in hard times were, over generations, selecting for exactly the kind of infectious pressure that would eventually hollow them out. The cultural taboo, in other words, is not separate from the biology. It is the biology expressed through culture. This is the same pattern we see with the predator rule. The avoidance of predator meat across cultures is not purely cultural. It reflects real biological pressures, energy costs, toxin accumulation, parasite load, that made predator meat a bad long-term bet, and that natural selection translated into instinct and then into cultural norm. The same process appears to have happened with the human taboo, with the added dimension that the epidemiological pressure is even more specific and even more direct. There is something worth noting about what this actually means. The rule that humans do not eat humans is often presented as a purely moral or cultural prohibition, as if removing the cultural context would reveal that there is no deeper reason behind it. The evidence points in the opposite direction. The biology, the epidemiology, and the evolutionary record all suggest that this particular rule has been enforced by consequences severe enough and consistent enough that the species learned it, first through selection pressure, then through instinct, then through the cultural codification that made it explicit. You do not need to appeal to morality to explain why no human civilization ever developed sustainable cannibalism as a food practice. The math did not work. The disease pressure was severe and specifically targeted, and natural selection, over long enough timescales, tends to be a more effective teacher than any law or prohibition. The taboo came later. The lesson came first, written in exactly the kind of biological language that does not require anyone to consciously understand it to follow it. Every species that has tried to scale the consumption of its own kind has run into the same wall. The pathogens most precisely adapted to your biology are the ones that evolved inside you. The food source that looks most familiar is the one your biology is least equipped to safely process at scale. We did not invent the rule. We just noticed slowly and at considerable cost what the biology was already saying, and we built our civilizations around it.